In dieser Podcast-Serie der Akantos Akademie geht es vor dem Hintergrund des Anfang Juli erscheinenden Buches Corona und der Überwindung der Getrenntheit um die Aufarbeitung der Corona-Krise aus unterschiedlichen Perspektiven. Dieser Podcast wird in englischer Sprache gehalten. In today's podcast, we will meet Charles Eisenstein, who contributed to the second book of the Akantos Academy on the Corona crisis with an essay titled The Coronation, die Krönung. Charles Eisenstein is a speaker and writer focusing on themes of civilization, consciousness, money, and human cultural evolution. His viral short films and essays online have established him as a genre-defying social philosopher and a countercultural intellectual. Eisenstein graduated from Yale University in 1989 with a degree in mathematics and philosophy and spent the next 10 years as a Chinese-English translator. The author of Sacred Economies and Climate, A New History, currently lives in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. And we will speak with Andreas Neider, editor of the two Corona books and co-founder of the Akantos Academy. He is the author of several books on anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner. Currently, he is working on a new book on ecology and our future. Okay, great. Welcome you two to this podcast series from the Akantos Academy. And the first question is for you, Charles. Your essay in this new book on the Corona crisis is titled The Coronation. Why do you speak of a coronation in context of COVID-19?
Well, one of the ideas in that essay is that this is an initiatory moment for humanity, or at least for civilization. And I'm not the only one who's been saying this, that this interruption in our routines and this interruption in normalcy gives us a chance to choose a different direction if we want to. So what is a coronation? A coronation is a ceremony of coming into rulership or coming into sovereignty. So one thing that the COVID-19 crisis is showing us is how big a change is possible if humanity is united in a common cause, in a common goal, in a common understanding of what's important. Now, I personally think that the response to COVID-19 is not ideal, let me put it that way. But whether or not you agree with the response, it's still clear that we made enormous changes almost overnight. If anybody a few months before had said, let's reduce commercial air travel by 90%, that would have seemed ridiculous, impossible. Yet that is what happened. So it shows us that our helplessness and the feeling of inevitability, that we are on a collision course with nature, that nothing can really change, it shows us that's not true, that we do have the power to take a different direction. So that's one aspect of potentially coming into greater sovereignty. Another aspect of it, and I'm not sure how long you want me to talk here, but is it okay to say one more?
Yeah, please. Sure.
Another aspect is that the response to the crisis is showing us a direction that we had been going already toward more and more control, more and more isolation, more and more separation from each other, more and more separation from nature, from more and more fear of germs, more and more obsession with control. None of the things that we've responded to COVID-19 with are new. Humans in modern societies have become more and more distant from each other. Public gatherings, less and less important, more and more of life moving online, and the trend toward not going out, especially in the United States. I'm not sure what it's like in your countries, but here for many years, there's been less and less reason actually ever to mingle with other people, which is why for many people, it hasn't been that much of a disruption. For affluent, digitally connected people, not that much has changed. Even education moving online, that's been a trend for a long time. So what we're being shown is the extreme. We're being shown in stark detail where we have been headed, and therefore asked, do we actually want to go in that direction? Is progress, is evolution of our society, is our glorious destination to be a world where group hugs and in-person weddings and music festivals and carnivals and gigantic dance parties and all that is something of the past, and even seeing each other's bare faces and full expressions in public, in public spaces, is that a relic of a dirty and dangerous past that we have ascended above? Is that the future that we want? Because the crisis, even if it is subsiding, many of its habits are still with us, and at any time they can say, it's the second wave, the virus has mutated, there's a new virus. And some of our health authorities here have said, you should never shake hands again. You should always wear a mask in public forever. So, this is, I feel like we are at a crossroads right now, a choice point. And the choice at least is conscious, because we're being shown, here's where you've been going, where do you really want to go?
Is it our goal? Is it what we want? Thank you. Andreas, do you see a main problem of our time in the separation of man and nature? Can you please explain us a little bit and how you see it in connection with COVID-19?
Yeah, I quite agree with Charles in his opinion on this problem of separation in which we have come for a long time. And I think that this COVID-19 really puts us in a situation where we have to decide, do we want to go on this way which separates us, not only from nature, but from other people and from society, so that each one individual is more and more isolated, not only by these masks, but by a whole lot of other means which we are using, and mainly on this digital transformation. I think the chance in this COVID-19 disease is to realize that this disease is only the peak of an iceberg, which we can call a disease of separation. We have split one of each other, and we have split from nature. And especially in Germany, we see that the new COVID-19 explosion in this meat fabrication place there in North Rhine-Westphalia, where thousands of people are now infected during their work, which is to divide pieces of meat, of pigs, of dead pigs. I think this kind of symptom, it shows us where the problems in our time lie. We have so deeply separated ourselves from nature, and especially from the animals, that it's not random that this new outbreak of COVID-19 here in Germany is in a context of this meat production, and which we have there. And I think all these symptoms and they show us that we are really in a deep crisis. But I think, how Charles already said, if we decide together, at least in a certain amount of people, to decide, no, we don't want to continue this disease, this separation, but we want to go a new way where we can overcome this separation. If there are a lot of people who decide to not go in this direction anymore, I think there's really a chance of success. How Charles already said, that nobody would ever have expected that it is possible to stop the air travel by 90%, especially in the US, where a lot more of traffic is by airplane than in Germany. And nobody would have expected that it is possible to stop it. But it wasn't by free will. It was, of course, because this disease, this COVID-19 pandemic, at least there was no choice. But now, if the disease more and more goes away, we have the choice to say, no, we don't want to continue in that way. We want to go in another way, a new way. And then the question is, what will be this new way? Do we really have a picture of this new kind of living, a new kind of lifestyle, which doesn't separate us from each other and from nature, but will connect us in a new way and not a digital way?
Thank you. Now again, you, Charles. You have written many books, mainly on the topics of separation and connectedness. Do you see a chance to overcome our general separation in consequence of this crisis?
Yeah, I mean, we always have a chance.
Yeah.
The way I see it is that we are facing a series of, you could call them initiatory moments, a series of awakenings where habits of separation, and these are personal habits and collective habits that were unconscious, become conscious. Maybe not all at once, but we are progressively awakened to the truth of our interconnectedness, our interdependence, our interexistence, you could even say, and then offered opportunities to act on that. So it's not, I don't think that it's like one crisis is going to save us from a world machine built on the story of separation, by which I mean the story that who you are is a discrete, separate individual in an objective universe of things. And that therefore, what happens to this external world of things need not affect you if you can build a high enough border fence or dominate all of the other beings, all of the forces of nature and so forth. Like that's the ideology that has increasingly carried civilization for a long time. And we're gradually waking up to the fallacy of that way of seeing the world. I think the first wake-up call, I mean, it's kind of arbitrary, but maybe the first wake-up call was the atomic bomb and the nuclear age, which ended forever the idea that of total victory, that you could have an all-out war against the enemy and win that war, and then all of your problems would be solved. I mean, that was basically the mentality. Like if you locate your problem in an enemy, then the solution is to destroy the enemy.
Yeah.
And that was the operating principle in civilization for thousands of years. You know, even in ancient Greece, there would be wars between city-states, and the loser would get exterminated. But today, ever since 1950, really, that has been impossible because of nuclear blowback. Because of mutually assured destruction. It's no longer possible to see the world in terms of a final solution. And then the second big wake-up call was the ecological crisis that many people conceive of as climate change. I think that the crisis is actually a lot deeper and more complex than a matter of greenhouse gases. But it is showing us that what we do to nature happens to us in some way, that we are inextricably tied to nature. I don't think we've really learned this yet. I'm not even sure if some people, some of the leaders of my country even understand that you cannot win total war. But nonetheless, a significant number of people now are starting to get it, that we're not actually separate from nature, that what happens to, for example, the Amazon or the Congo somehow affects us inescapably. I don't think we've actually learned this, but we're starting to. And we're trying to escape from that realization. For example, the idea that we could transcend our need for soil and a healthy earth if we have a technological way to produce food. Precision fermentation, animal cell cultures, hydroponics. Oh, okay, technology has replaced nature. Like a lot of people still think of this as progress. And I'm not saying that we couldn't do that. I'm just saying what is lost that we cannot measure and cannot count when we destroy the rest of life, and when we cut off our relationships to other people, to other beings, to the microbiome, to the bacterial world with masks and excessive hand washing. That's a cutoff of relationship. Social distancing is a cutoff of relationship. And strip mining and fracking and clear cutting, that's a cutoff of relationship. That's what unifies all of these things. So is COVID-19 teaching us the futility of that way of trying to serve our well-being and safety? I don't think we got the lesson yet, but potentially it's there.
I hope so. I hope so that we learn and don't want to control everything in that way. Andreas, in your essay in this second book on the Corona crisis, you speak of a new kind of exercises which can be used to overcome our general separation. Could you please explain those exercises a little bit for us?
Yeah, the point which I wanted to make clear in this essay and this second book is that each of us can do something, not in the outer world, but in his mind. He can change by certain kind of exercises this situation in which we are all the time in our normal consciousness, that we feel ourselves separated. This is normal. You don't have the feeling in this kind of consciousness that it is not normal to feel oneself separated from anything outside of yourself. And for your normal consciousness, it is necessary to feel separated, but otherwise you couldn't distinguish between yourself and your outer surroundings. So for a normal consciousness, at least until the age of 2 or 3 years in childhood, but with this age, you feel yourself separated from other beings and you get used to this consciousness as normal. But as Rudolf Steiner pointed out, there is a way or a method to realize that in this kind of consciousness, our normal daily consciousness, there are special elements which are indeed the elements which connect us with the outer world. But in our normal consciousness, it is constructed in that way that these elements which connect us with our outer world, with nature, with other human beings, that these elements are suppressed so that we don't take notice of them. We don't realize that there are elements in our normal daily consciousness which are suppressed. And so these exercises, they make these elements conscious. For instance, in our normal way to think, we are concentrated of the content of our thinking. We are looking at the content of our thinking, but not of the activity which lies in thinking. We don't realize that there is a special activity which we use when we think of something. We are only concentrated of the content of our thoughts. And the same thing is going on with our feelings, because with every kind of impression we have by our senses, there are certain feelings which we don't realize in our normal daily consciousness, because they are very, how do you say it in English? They are very fluently, they pass away very quickly. You don't get them because they are so fluent. And with these exercises, I describe some of them in my essay in this book. You can become conscious of these feelings, so that the other problem is normally you are in this consciousness that you think all my thoughts, all my feelings are personal. They don't have something to do with the outer world. They are completely subjective or personal, but they don't belong to the outer world. And by the means of these exercises, one becomes aware that these feelings, in reality, they belong to the things we live with. This method began by the natural science of Goethe. Goethe was, I think, the first, and Steiner discovered that, who said, don't give or put always theories on these things you see around you, but let these things speak for themselves, because the theory lies within them. And if you let these natural things or realities speak for themselves, you will discover that there lies a theory within them. You don't have to put a theory which you develop in your mind onto these things, but these things, they can speak for themselves. Let the things speak out themselves. And in this direction, I think we can get more and more in connection with our outer world and see that what we discover as a deeper dimension of our consciousness, these feelings or thoughts which we can develop, that they aren't a phenomenon of our personal consciousness, but they belong to the things which we are experiencing. So this is the first step. And second or third step would be that in our actions and in our, normally we call it our fate, we are also separated, or we feel separated, because we say all these things which happen to us, normally we find them disturbing, and we don't feel connected to these things which happen to us. But by another kind of exercises, we can discover that in reality, all things which happen to us, they have something to do with us, and that in reality we are connected with a kind of higher consciousness within ourselves, which for the first moment we think this is something which happens with us or to us from outside, but in reality it isn't outside, it is connected with us. We have something to do with all these things we call our fate. So this is, if you understand what I mean, this is this direction which I have described in this essay by some of these exercises.
Yes, thank you. Now I would like to ask both of you the following question, which is somehow connected to something that you mentioned before, Charles, another crisis, the climate crisis. And do you see a chance that the climate crisis could be taken more seriously in context of the corona crisis, or we will come to an even bigger global catastrophe?
Well, okay. I don't think that there's any direct way that the corona crisis is going to awaken people to the climate crisis.
Okay.
I appreciate what Andreas was saying about this mysterious connection between what happens on the outside and what happens on the inside, and the importance of developing the perceptions and the consciousness of that, which of course doesn't mean anything as simple as beliefs create reality or something like that, but just the awareness that there is a communication, an intimate communication happening between self and world, between inner and outer, between the events of our lives and the events of our psyche. And the mystery of it leads us potentially to greater and greater self-awareness, and therefore greater and greater capacity to exert positive change in the world. And this is connected. So if you want to talk about the climate crisis, if you follow this principle, you understand that the climate crisis is related to the political climate and the social climate and the psychic climate, the climate of opinion and the climate of belief, the climate of generosity or the climate of exploitation, the climate of disrespect, or the climate of reverence. And when we understand that principle, that everything affects everything else, it broadens the scope of what you might consider climate action. Today, for something to count as climate action, it has to have some translation into carbon dioxide, basically. That's what increasingly has justified something as being environmental. Green equals low carbon. The problem with that kind of reduction is the same as any kind of reductionism. It lies in what is left out.
Yeah.
And typically it's the most vulnerable, and in the end, maybe the most important beings that are left out. What's the climate contribution of people in prisons? What's the climate contribution of whales? These are not valuable in the carbon accountancy mindset. It's only when you understand that everything is part of everything else that you realize that these marginalized and discarded beings might be the most important of all.
Mm.
So perhaps, to answer your question, perhaps the COVID crisis is stirring up a greater solidarity and a greater compassion and a greater sense that we are all in this together that could lead to more of a consideration of our extended relationships and more of a consideration toward those who have been invisible. But so far, I mean, this is our work. This is not, oh, is COVID going to magically widen our awareness of climate change? It's our work to propagate this consciousness of interconnection, of interbeing. It's not going to happen by itself. Right now, the COVID response has actually harmed the already vulnerable and precarious people on Earth. It's done more harm than it has protected people. The number of the UN Food Program, World Food Program, estimates that 265 million people will face starvation this year. 265 million people. That is, and I don't know if you've seen the photographs and the videos of starving children. That's happening all over the world right now because so many people were day laborers and they fed their families with the money they earned that day, and that's all been shut down. And they, go to stand in line for food every day to feed their children who haven't eaten for 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, and there's not enough. Like that amount of anguish, does anyone even know about that? Is that in the statistics, the epidemiological statistics? So this is our work to broaden our perspectives, broaden our horizons, help people see the unseen so that we know what we are doing here. It's our work now. It's not an automatic delivery from COVID-19, but it is an invitation to do that work. It's a wake-up call.
Yeah, we have to put effort on that. And what do you think about that, Andreas?
I quite agree with Charles that it is not automatically with COVID-19 and this corona crisis that people are now aware of the seriousness of the climate crisis and these global problems, because we still are separated, not only within ourselves, but especially from other parts of the world, which are mostly on the south side of our globe. And this kind of separation, I think the chance with this corona crisis and with the lockdown, I think for the first time, and it was especially in these European countries and in the Americas, that this experience could be made for the first time globally, that we were imprisoned. We couldn't go out as we wanted, and our human rights were restricted in a certain way. And I think for many people it was the first time in their life that they made this experience. But if we see it right with the climate crisis and with this extinction of biodiversity and of a lot of beings in the animal world and in the biological world, a lot of beings, plants, trees, and animals, insects, birds, and so on, for the long time, we restricted their biotopes, their living rooms, we restricted and we imprisoned. A lot of animals were imprisoned. In China, we know these wildlife markets where these wild animals are imprisoned. And now this imprisonment, for the first time, a lot of people in the Western world experienced this kind of imprisonment for the first time in their lives. So they can feel what it means to be imprisoned, to not to be able to go free where you want. And this is an experience which wild animals and other beings on our planet have made for a long, long time, because mankind have restricted all these beings for a long time. So I think it could be the chance to realize, will we live on in this kind of lifestyle which restricts the life room of many, many beings on this planet, or will we live together in a new kind of way where we give room to nature back to that it has the room it needs, the animals, the room, the living room they need for their lives, and the plants, the trees, and so on. I think there's a certain chance that we see, no, we can't go on in this way. And what we have experienced in this crisis, we don't want for ourselves, but we don't want it for the other beings on this planet too.
Yeah, I would like to thank you both, Charles and Andreas, for your participation in this podcast series to the Corona book. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yair.
Yeah, thank you. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed hearing Andreas' perspectives as well.